stuff that I talk about all the time. So, but one of the things I did want to go over, because I know we didn't finish that one take that was looking at the guy that says that water has, contains information, whatever that means. Today I wanted to go over something that I've talked about already before in different instantiations, but I want to look at David Mianos's work where he talks about I guess, a myth that is continually perpetuated, particularly by pseudo-historians, pseudo-archaeologists, etc., when it comes to things like the movement of Indo-European peoples, right? And when we say that, when historians say that, anthropologists say that, we only mean it that they spoke that language. There's nothing discernible that you can tell about the people. All it is they spoke this language, right? They spoke this family of languages. It doesn't tell you anything about, hello, it's good to see you. It's good to see you, Akshat. It's good to see you. So, that's kind of where I want to go. Yes, another Shakespeare stream. Also, I have a Ko-Fi now. I've heard that that's easier for people that are not in the US or Canada, etc., to donate to, if you would like to donate to me directly, because right now, and I'll be quite honest, I got my essentially my contract wasn't renewed for the next year, so I am not working right now. And so, if people would like to help me in some way when it comes to that, right now I am looking for another job, but, still, hopefully, something. But regardless, if you would like to help me in some way, you can do so either through my Ko-Fi, through my Cash App, things like that. So that way you don't have to feel like you can't be included if you can't use Throne. Throne, I do have a sort of, fund that I'm just going to leave open until it's filled, because it's one of those things that, I know it might seem strange for some people, like the amount, but, the reason why is because, like, that's enough to cover a lot of things that I need. So again, if you would like to donate to that fund, please do so. Again, that's up to your discretion. I also have other things like books for my research, that are always useful as well if people would prefer that. But you can use my Ko-Fi. It's linked here. It's pinned here in YouTube chat. I don't know if Ahmad could put it in Twitch chat, but we'll see. So what is it that we're going to be talking about? What about let me know. Let me know. I tried changing the source over to this thing, I think, but we can see. There we go. Okay, good, good, good. Okay, good. So, like I said, sorry for the technical difficulties. I was not expecting whatsoever. So, like I said, we're going to look at Professor Mianos's um, the archaeological evidence about the Indo-Aryan speaking people in the second millennium BCE, and kind of how people have been getting a lot of things wrong because of that. So, okay. So let's switch over. I need to get another.
For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilization. For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe. A more recent pseudoscience is precisionism, an idea popularized by a machinist named Christopher Dunn. The basic concept is that certain ancient artifacts, almost always stone artifacts, have been made so precisely that it would have been impossible for known ancient peoples to have made them. The intent here is to attribute the manufacture of these items to an unknown civilization with more advanced tools. This idea is based on the premise that accuracy in manufacture is determined by the tool, not by the person or persons operating the tool. For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe.
Does oh does this work better? Does this work better? Can you hear me now? I'm not sure. I feel like I need to move this down. Okay, better now? Is it better? Is it good now? Okay, good. Okie dokie. Okay, good. That's all that matters. As long as you can hear me, that's what's important here. Okay. Turn off the mute for now.
What can ancient stones, buried structures, and unearthed artifacts reveal about one of the most disputed migrations in history? Join me as I examine the archaeological evidence bearing on the question of a migration of Indo-Aryan-speaking peoples into or out of the Indian subcontinent. Does mainstream archaeology have it right? Did Indo-Aryans come to India in the 2nd millennium BCE? Or is a better case to be made that Indo-Aryans are indigenous to India? I've already discussed the genetic evidence in another video, and I will do one on the linguistic evidence soon. But the journey we will take in this video will be grounded entirely in the physical traces left behind, enigmatic clues that might help us to paint a picture of movement and cultural transformation. Together, we'll uncover how archaeology illuminates this monumental chapter in human history. The story may lie in the earth, so let's dig in.
Am I the only one that's getting the weird echoing?
What is the theory of Indo-Aryan migration? It's the proposal that a group of people from a specific language family migrated into the Indian subcontinent in the 2nd millennium BCE. That's between 2000 and 1000 BCE.
I got it.
And settled there. Whether they did so largely peacefully or there was conflict is not really relevant to the theory itself, but this migration is not believed to have happened all at once, but rather was a slow trickle in over an extended period.
This is the most important part right here. It happened at least over 5 centuries. At least over 5 centuries. The whole idea of the invasion is something which has always been used to all good now? Okay. Yeah, no. It's because I had multiple, because I had the microphone like this to see if that worked, and then this one, and then the computer's one, so it's all good now. But yeah, there is this issue that arises when people think that the invasion happened literally like one day. They just decided, like, we're just going to take over all of, the Indian subcontinent. Like, no, that is not how that worked. There were many reasons behind why, right, they felt the need to move, right? Because again, migration for human beings is the natural state. Like, the idea of being absolutely static for very long periods of time is not typical, right? It's only now in the modern period that we really have something along those lines. But in the way in which right, where it's like people can just never have to leave, right? Because we have larger distribution of food, larger distribution of water, not everywhere obviously, but point being that, like, you don't have as many, the reasons that used to exist in the prehistorical eras.
Period of time. These people are posited to have entered from the northwest and initially settled in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, and then over time spread out towards the eastern part of India. Now, what languages are we talking about here? These people are believed to have been members of the Indo...
One thing I do like about this map, and I actually need to find this map, if someone could put it in the Discord, I would appreciate that. I hate how reframe ancient history in the context of the modern nation. I am almost tempted, like, maybe doing this for a little bit and then going over the Professor Jiang, Alexander Dugin, and Sneako video, because it's just like unbelievable, like the most Orientalist stuff I've have heard in a long time. And again, if you work in the discipline of history, you hear a lot of people that
you hear from a lot of people, even students, right, that they come in with this vision of the world, that they've been taught, and and one of the main things that you can tell is that they think of, right, the Orient, quote unquote, right, in the Orientalist way, as being somehow completely different, as if they have a completely different consciousness, right? Almost as if they're a different species of human. But obviously that is not true. But it's just this very strange thing to hear someone say, "Oh, you are good person from China," and then Professor Jiang is like, "Well, actually, I'm Canadian," like it's like, we have I see. So we'll watch a little bit of this because this is long. There's no way and I don't necessarily want to go all the way into the full-on discussion. I think we can go at least up to here, where it talks about Modi and the usage of it for nationalist purposes. I think that's good enough. So.
European language family, and specifically of a subset.
Also, another thing too is, like, you see here Iran, right? You have all of these, like, Kurdish, you have Armenian up here, right? Like, most people in Iran, yeah, they speak Farsi because that's the language of of this region. But, like, whenever I first learned what is on the continuum of, because I learned, when I was, this was a long time ago. This was during my undergrad, so again, a while ago. But when I was learning the history of language, really going into, like, historical linguistics, we had to learn things like Sanskrit. It doesn't mean that I'm good at reading Sanskrit. I definitely was more so back then, right? But I don't really recall a lot of it, right? I'm mainly focused on understanding language as a continuum, as opposed to just, like, reciting, verb tables, right? However, when I first got introduced to the Persianate world, in fact, I still have the book somewhere. I didn't even learn Farsi. I didn't even learn the language spoken in Iran. I learned Dari, which is the language that is spoken as a lingua franca in Afghanistan, right? And then later, got to know some Tajik and stuff like that. But it just shows that it's this immense continuum of related languages. And so there's always so many issues, especially when things like Hindi, right, do work to undermine, right, the languages of, right, of India that are not, right, just Hindi, right? And I think that's an important thing too. Put the map on Discord, yes. I am just now hearing about Jiang. I thought he was okay at first, but then he went on Nick Fuentes' show or something, and it may have not been Nick already. Yeah. Also, I don't know if people got the at everything, the at everything, in my server. I know I'm not in the server right now. Like I said, I've been working really hard, and even though, like, my adjuncting contract, ended, a lot of people's ended, actually. It wasn't just me, it was a lot of people from different departments. And so now I'm, trying to get back into the loop with more streaming and more, because now I do have time, but I still need the job, you know what I mean? But now I have a little bit more time to stream, but I'm still busy, right? Like, I'm still doing other stuff. But like I said, if you'd like to help in some way, but I know I'm not in the Discord. I just really needed a break from the whole internet stuff, like, YouTube, and I would post stuff in the community tab, which y'all can post in there too. It's not just me. You can post interesting things there too. That's why it's a community tab, right? And I can definitely, I plan on returning to Discord. I just really needed a break. Like, I was just running ragged, and I really just needed that break. So, yeah, my native language is a dialect of Hindi. Yeah, see, yeah, they speak Awadhi and stylized Hindi there that way, right? So, like, what's interesting, funny enough, because you brought up Bengali, right, is that there used to be this white lady, right? That was like, I guess she was like I don't know, but she would call me, right? And I'm not a boy, so I'm just gonna say that right away. But this was a while ago. She would call me Bengali boy. Like that was her name for me, was Bengali boy. And I was like, am I, you know, here I'm thinking, here I'm thinking, oh, okay. Uh, Suddenly now I'm being told that like, yes, you're actually a Bengali boy, even though I've never been to Bengal. So I just had a baby girl, so me and my partner are getting adjusted to not sleeping. Oh, well, congratulations. Oh, Raven, I am so happy to hear that. That's such a joyful thing to hear. I wish you the best of luck and congratulations. And I get it. Yeah, not sleeping. I mean, it's one of those things, right? Um, so, but yeah, if people want to, I don't know if other streamers will allow me to post, because I know Sunday would let me post stuff, at everyone if people can do that. But I don't know if that's allowed. So, but let people know the word
of this family called the Indo-Aryan languages. Today, these languages include the Hindustani languages like Hindi and Urdu, Bengali, Punjabi, Marathi, Gujarati.
One thing I also want to say is I still read books written to this day because look, I get it. Colloquially speaking, people do not refer to the subcontinent as Hindustan, right? But it is interesting to see when historians and linguistics use it as a term because they don't want to just say India, right? The whole point is the word Hindu, right, comes from the word Indus, right? I mean, it's the reason why in Persian it's Sindhu, right? It's Sindhu, and then you have Hindu, right? But it's all in reference to this river valley, right, where the cultures developed and then later spread, right? And so that's one of the things that I find interesting is like sometimes I'll refer to that whole general area as Hindustan, not because I'm saying, oh, everybody speaks Hindu or because everybody, but it's literally was a place name. I'm not saying I use it all the time. Right. Yeah, the opposite. Sorry, my bad. Yes. It's Hindu. It's Hindu in Persian languages, and it's Sindhu in yes, in Sanskrit it's Sindhu. That's right. Yeah. Thank you. And so yeah, because Sindh province is on the right bank of the Indus River in Pakistan, right? Yeah. So anyway, because of that, when once I've referenced it as Hindustan, that's because I'm including all of the areas that speak Hindustani/Indo-Aryan languages, right, that are closely related and derivative of to some extent, and also by other derivations too, right? Vedic, Sanskrit, etc. Right? Which used to be a generic term for river. Ah, okay, I see. So that meant river. I see. Oh, that's fascinating. Because like one of the things that, so this is an aside, but recently I had a friend that went to, they went to visit for themselves, right? They went to Gangotri, right, way up in the, I think South Asia is like the EU. It's super diverse, and post-colonial borders don't capture that post-racism. Right, like so many people were against the idea of partitioning this land, especially on something like religious grounds, because of the fact that these regions have never had that kind of division before, right? Like not even under the Mughals, not even under. So yeah, thanks a lot, Mountbatten, right? But I mean, it's the same thing like with Afghanistan, right? Like, I forget who, someone was telling me this, but I think it might have been you, Boy Meets Minnie. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but that the Pashtun state on the western side of Pakistan initially signed up so that it could be part of the Union of India, right? But obviously having an exclave like that doesn't really work, but and let alone what they had to do to the Punjab, and I mean, all of this stuff, which is why I think, to me, not seeing it as a continuum, not seeing it as all of these interrelated things, actually is one of the great faults that we can very much see, right? We can see how the nation state paradigm fails immensely, right, because of something like
and others. These languages can be traced back to Sanskrit, and further back to an Indo-Aryan original language. One reason why this is controversial is because the sacred...
There is one thing, though. I would love to actually get a full set. I mean, I'm not saying I need it now, and, of course, I have books on my throne if you'd like to donate to that. If you'd like to donate to me directly, you can go to my link tree, right? linktr.e/Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare. Or whatever. Again, totally, if you want. But I would love to read the Rig Vedas. Well, I would want to read them again, because I did have to read them when we were talking about the history of language, because they're like the first real text of an Indo-European language that are written down in the way that they're written down, right? They're not, whatever. And then I remember we had to read some of the Gathas, right, of the Zoroastrian literature. And then we read a little bit of the Mahabharata, but I've always wanted to read the entire Mahabharata, because I've read, well, I mean, the Bhagavad Gita is an episode in the Mahabharata, but, like, there's a lot I haven't read, and I've heard it's pretty good. So.
Books of the Hindus were composed in Sanskrit, and this theory suggests either that the books could not have come into existence until after this migration occurred, or that they were composed outside of India. Some Hindus believe the books are much older than 2000 BCE. As for me, what I share with you is not based on a political or religious ideology I hold. I don't care whether Indo-Aryans migrated into South Asia at this time or at any other time. I have no personal stake in this.
And that's another thing too, is technically nobody alive today has a personal stake in this either. But politically, they make a stake, right? Like, nobody can say people from 5,000 years ago I'm a direct ancestor of those people, like, as if to believe that there's some kind of pure descendants, right? Hello, not so Oedipus. It's good to see you. Because of GSL, you will always be Shakespeare to me. Oh yeah, no, that's totally fine. I'm just trying to, make sure I pronounce it, in a way that people might remember. But yeah, like, if you want to go to my Ko-Fi, if you're international, again, to help me out, you can do so. Or Throne, I have books on there. I also have my fund that I have, but again, you're not obligated. Also, not so Oedipus, if there is something you'd like me to go over that's like, right now we're talking about the belief where people try to like launder the Aryan invasion theory, which is just a false, for nationalistic purposes. But if you want to bring in something about, something from Israel or whatever, that's totally fine with me, because I know that you have a lot of stuff on hand. So
all I care about is what is indicated by the evidence. The theory of
again, this is the thing: is as a historian, I love reading, right, all of these different texts and this and that, right? It's great, but it's when it becomes politicized and it's no longer a question of religion, right? It's we can even call it that. Is that then you have this weird shift to where now you have people that say, well, X must be the case because of that, right? Like, instead of thinking of these documents in a way that some historians do hold them, there are many historians that are very religious, in fact, but they can still understand the nuance of understanding these texts in in the context in which they arise from, and not seeing as somehow that takes away from the text. Tell me about Monsieur Ushani, if you know anything, Levinas's friend. Off the top of my head, I do know Levinas. I actually quite like Levinas's work. When I was in grad school, that was like a big thing early on for me.
Indo-Aryan migration is based mostly on linguistic evidence, which is complex and difficult for non-specialists to understand.
And this is the thing. When people refer to Indo-Aryan, right, Germanic, Italic, uh, Celtic, Slavic, that doesn't mean what in the 19th century and such came to add meaning to. Literally just means people that speak that language. Like technically speaking, if we were to apply to this now, right? Everybody who's native or whose like first language is English would be English, right? Right? Everybody whose mother tongue is German is German, quote unquote, right? Like that. It's kind of hard because people like to like identities change so much. But when we're talking about especially prehistorical or very early on in history, right? That's what we mean when we say, oh, they speak the Celts. What we mean is Celtic speaking people. That's it. It doesn't tell you anything about how they look like. It doesn't tell you anything about that. So, um, one of my aunts speaks Garhwali. She's from the mountainous regions near Nepal, Uttarakhand. Oh, very nice. I used to have a friend that back when they had, I don't know if the monarchy returned actually. I haven't really kept up much with Nepalese politics. But I used to have a friend that when they got rid of the monarchy, their family moved to, well, I was living in California at the time. And so I knew stuff about Nepal from that. Actually, that's actually where I found out that they have an airport specifically to go visit, right, the important sites for the Buddha, right? Even 500 years ago, a lot of people in Eastern Germany had Slavic identity. And well, not only that, but it's like the idea that you can keep this identity and it just keeps going on and on and on and on, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? Because again, migration, intermarriage, all of these things, even there's no, things we've already discussed. But Nepal got rid of the monarchy in 2008. What about short kings? Yes, yes. Yeah. This was like 2009, 2010 when I knew them. But yeah, I know. Oh yeah, I did see that they burned down their parliament. I know there were some people that were trying to say that they're, that, well, it was talking about the Maoists. I'll just put it like that for now.
But basically, we're talking about the reconstruction of the family tree of Indo-European languages by using the evidence within the languages themselves. In order to provide corroboration, people have looked to other forms of evidence, archaeological, genetic, historical, etc. But these forms of evidence are far less firm. A few preliminaries to get out of the way before we get into the meat of this.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Genetic evidence is less firm than the linguistic evidence. I wonder why that might be. Right? Now, this isn't, I'm obviously, tongue in cheek here, but the point being that, like, when I say DNA tests don't tell you anything, they really don't tell you anything. Right? In any real sense, at least in what it's supposed to be telling you. Right?
There are some misunderstandings people have about this subject that I think need to be cleared up. One, despite what you may hear from some people, whether speakers of a certain language entered into the Indian subcontinent and stayed there has no bearing on whether one race is better than another, or one culture is better than another.
Exactly. Like, this is the problem when people bring up the invasion theory. My DNA test was promised to be 3,000 years ago. I know. It's yeah. Like, I mean, speaking about, like, people that do use that type of rhetoric, right, is that, like, even Ben Gurion, right, in Israel said, oh, actually, the Palestinians are the actual descendants of the Israelites because they were here this whole time. It's like, yeah, that's, like, even they understood that they weren't, quote-unquote, indigenous, right? These Ashkenazi Jews were not indigenous to, by definition, they aren't, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be Ashkenazi. Right? But yeah, yeah.
2. Indo-Aryan is the name for a group of languages, not for a race. Why is it called?
Exactly. It just means all what it means. Indo referring to the Indus River Valley, the Indo-Gangetic Plain, particular if you want to expand it. And then Aryan is just a way to. Sometimes it's even written as Indo-Iranian, because Iran Shahr, right, was, which essentially translates to the domain of, right, the Arya, right, is referring to Iran, right? Like, that's all that refers to. It's referring to people that lived on the Iranian plateau, that whose language changed, right? Was still related to Sanskrit, but is changed, and we can see this because, like, you have the Bhagavad Gita, right, which means like it's already noted that it's a song, right? That's what Gita means, and you have it in Iranic languages as Gotha, right? So you have Gita, you have Gotha, and then that eventually translates to, if we want to take it all the way now, one of the things that comes from that in English is hymn, right? Hymn, right? So it's the hymn of, and we understand hymn is like a religious song, right? And it's like, that's all that means. You should cover Israeli archaeology. Hello, Big Jerry. But I don't have anything on hand. I might go into something. Do you think they'll use AI to engineer? Well, AI is not what people think AI is. I think what you're talking about is like gene editing, which is like CRISPR, not really AI, but
Called that? The prefix Indo indicates these languages are found largely in the Indian subcontinent, and the term Aryan suggests that these are languages spoken in Aryavarta, the land of the Arya.
Exactly,
as referred to in
Aryavarta.
ancient Indian texts.
or
But the-
or Iran Shahr. They're just different. There are different. Yes, the older term would be Arya Ara, but you also have Iran Shahr, which is, I prefer to use this one because you can hear the word Iran in it, right? Iran Shahr, right? Iran, right?
The ancient word Arya does not mean the same thing as the modern linguistic term Indo-Aryan. Indo-Aryan is a subgroup of the larger Indo-Iranian language group, which in turn is part of the even larger Indo-European language family. It's a classification, in the same way that we classify animal species or minerals. I recognize that some people use the word Aryan as shorthand for Indo-Aryan, but I think this just causes confusion and should be avoided.
Yes, like, look, all that matters here is I find it very difficult when people do use Aryan as a way to sort of shorthand it, because it does confuse people. Why? Because people have maliciously used history, archaeology, etc., in order to inculcate people with these conspiratorial, right, these far right, whatever, just this complete pseudo history, pseudo archaeology, pseudo linguistics, right, all to create this idea that there is this like pure race of people, and that just isn't true. Frankly, it cannot be true, right? Humans, by definition, could never fit that category, right? At least that's something I think people can definitely argue, even if you mean it in a more colloquial sense, right?
The term Arya was used in South Asia as a word meaning noble, and in Iran as an ethnonym. The term was only ever used by Indo-European speakers in Iran and India. There is no evidence it was ever used by any other Indo-European group. So it is.
And another thing too is like the reason why, like, there actually is a point where once they start settling places in northern India in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, you then have a movement of people that will later go on to become that were part of the groups of people that became the Iranians over time, where like they used horses, and like that's where a lot of this idea of chivalric knights not. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's one to one because it's not, but a lot of knight stuff, right? That people think of medieval knights, right? A lot of that comes from these people that were called noble, right? Or were, but that isn't atypical for any group of people to call themselves that. That's just, you know, in fact, if anything, that's very common. But it's when people take that, the fact that they did call themselves noble, when they were really referring to the fact that, among other things, right, they did have for a long period a more egalitarian society. Why? Because, and you see this in the discussion of the Greeks, like Herodotus, against the Sarmatians, right, where, and the Scythians, but mostly the Sarmatians, where people think that's where the legend of the Amazons come from. Why? Because they allowed women to ride on horses and to be warriors as well, and to even be leaders, right? Which the Greeks thought, no, that can't be the case, right? Like, how is it that you're doing that? So, yeah, you can see where audio, yeah. But will they incorporate LLMs into gene editing? I really don't know. I unfortunately would be very much at the limit of my knowledge, and I have to admit I really don't know much about those technologies to give you a good response to that. Do you think all is now and we're actually in a compressed history? Oh yes, thank you for that correction. Yes, Gatha means verse, and well, Gita means poetry song. But yeah, through different intermediaries, and eventually it becomes the word hymn in English because you have, like, anyway, I don't want to get too in depth on that. So, but facts on the ground, archaeological practice, and territorial self-fashioning in Israeli society. Oh, interesting. You don't want to think about it. I understand it would negate history. What are you talking about? How would that negate history? That's something that you're projecting into the future. That's not history. That's, I don't know. Maybe I am misunderstanding. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Noble is a later interpretation. The original meaning of the word is probably lost of time. Yeah, so that's the reason why people think, and I defer to the people for whom this is the area of expertise, right? Because this is not my area of expertise, but it's something that I do have to deal with when talking about like Jewish history because of how it's been applied, right? How they've taken these ideas and applied them, right? In an exclusionary way, even in the United States, right, against Latin Americans, etc. So the reason why I think the idea of it being tied to the word noble exists is because this idea that was the beginning of what people would call a chivalric knighthood, and that the concept of nobility is something that then also is tied to the concept of aristocracy. I'm not saying that is the case. I'm just saying that is one of the interpretations that people have taken, right, in order to try to continue on the connection. Whether or not that's the case, I've only read stuff that argues it in different senses, but I would say if that is the case, because we do know that, like, for example, like if I can give you a quick example of how things that now seem endlessly European, so to speak, actually started off as things from the Middle East. Coat of arms. Coat of arms were not a European thing until the conquest of Iberia, right? The settling of Iberia, and then the usage. I think it was by the Nasrids. Could be wrong, but they would put crests, right? Rather, they would put shields, right? Coat of arms on their swords and stuff, right? Like they used that image because those type of shields were used in Near Eastern, quote unquote, warfare, right? Not so much in the kind of warfare that happened in Western Europe. And so, you have them adopting those things. Because if you look at the Romans, they don't have coat of arms, right? They have insignias, that's true, but they don't have coat of arms. They don't have a shield upon which then they have images, right? And so that is something that does happen in Iberia and later spread through all of Europe. And it's things like that that we could see the cultural influences of, animal husbandry, horses, right? Blah, 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 being used in these different periods of time, and how they then overlap and intersect with one another. And then, have other effects that were, you couldn't have known at the start. Right. So many overlapping disciplines in my question. I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. And again, like I said, I am not an expert in, AI stuff. So I am not, unfortunately, able to really answer your question. I can, hold it in my mind's eye and sort of consider it, but I don't really know its application. I mean, geological history? I'm not sure.
It is inappropriate to call all Indo-Europeans Aryans. 4. This theory does not posit that anyone brought the Vedas to the Indian subcontinent from somewhere else. To be sure, some think that maybe a few of the songs of the Rig Veda may have been composed in Afghanistan. I am not one of them, but the Vedas as a whole, all scholars agree, are the product of the Indian subcontinent.
But another thing to also keep in mind is that the idea that the Rig Vedas were brought to the subcontinent, right, is used as a way to delegitimize, right, indigenous folklore, to delegitimize the fact that it is indeed a product of its time and place, right? Because, if it was composed before, right, then in the same way, it is something from outside that was imposed upon a population, right? And so therefore the belief is, and this is where the erroneous aspects come in, is that then the people who are closest to those people that brought in those texts, which they didn't. I also don't subscribe to the thing. I mean, is it possible that it was? I mean, yeah, in the sense that was generally within the same, sort of cultural area, right? I mean, the Mughals, right? It's like they themselves were in Afghanistan and then eventually went through the main pass by Jalalabad, right? And then use that to invade northern India. So, and there's always been movement between Central Asia and northern India. So could it have been? Sure, but there isn't very good evidence. It's more so, you can see these things that kind of seem to indicate that maybe some of the stories pre-existed. I mean, I'm sure oral traditions existed, by definition they did. So I don't think, but the reason why particularly Hindu nationalists don't like this theory is because they also want to say that that civilization came out from India, right? That it wasn't a quote unquote foreign influence on the subcontinent, but rather the other way around, right? That the subcontinent took it out of its borders, quote unquote, and spread it. However, again, the archaeological and historical evidence doesn't really point this direction. Again, Kabul and Delhi and that area of the world, even Lahore, it's all of that was very densely populated as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if something came from slightly outside of the main area we know of, but it doesn't really matter. It only matters if you're trying to use these texts as a reason for why your culture, whatever culture that even is, right? But it's always a construction, right? Then tries to go back into the past and rewrite history. And this is why it's important to bring up, and for me, why I would argue it's important to bring stuff like this up, is because these nationalist histories always do very similar things, and that is that they take all of the heterogeneous elements out of the story that they want to tell of these people, quote unquote, right? And in doing so, they make it seem as though there is a very easy line of succession from one thing to the other. But that is not how the world works, right? This is why all of the great histories of the late 19th century, all of them remove elements that don't fit within the nationalist narrative. And here we see a problem where two groups of people, right, that are bigoted, Hindutva, right, people, and also just like, etc., and then also right-wing Europeans, right, white supremacists, they are trying to both claim this as theirs, right? If it was imposed from outside, then that means that no civilization, right, like what happened in northern India or what happened in Iran and greater Persia, etc., that only came to be because of these Europeans, right, that showed up and essentially taught the people there what to do, right? And so you can see that this clashes with two different ideas of, national. Want to cover Gratz versus Hirsch sometime? Sure, yeah. William Dalrymple has a lot of good work to discover the real history of the subcontinent. Yeah, like I myself have been trying to find good academic histories of the subcontinent. The one thing I don't like is that they want to limit everything at national borders, and I just don't understand why you would do that. Like, the history of the subcontinent shouldn't be divided into a Pakistani part, an Indian part, and a Bangladeshi part. You know what I mean? Like, because those things are modern constructs, right? Like, those nation states didn't always exist. So it's weird to stop at one border and then act like, oh, now we have to tell the story of how everything came to be on this side of the border, when it's like, obviously they're related, right? I mean, he is not strictly correct, because some hymns from the Vedas match the Gathas. Yeah, exactly. 1487, neither country was a thing. Exactly. And then before, 71, Bangladesh wasn't a thing either. So, it's... match the Gathas one to one if some simple grammatical substitutions. Right, and again, that goes to show, and this was some research that I had been reading into. Again, this isn't my area of expertise, right? My area of expertise is not, right, the subcontinent. It definitely is not this part of history, but it still interests me because, again, it affects so many other things, right? But what you see is that the older the Gathas you have, the more of those grammatical fixtures that you would have seen in Sanskrit, right, as it developed as a language, still appear in the earlier forms of, right, of what we would now call, right, the Iranic languages, particularly with like Farsi or something, right? Because, I mean, in the same way how there are also tons of dialects too, because like when I learned Dari, like it was like, well, you can learn Dari from Afghanistan, but the dialect you learn typically is the Kabuli dialect, which is fine, it's great, but it doesn't when you go to Pashtun areas, right, to Kandahar, or you go to Herat, or you go to along the Tajik border, right, it's like they might speak similar languages, but even within the space of several mountain valleys, right, the languages start to become unintelligible. Ironically, the Aryans were European invaders story forms a huge part of Dravidian nationalism, especially Tamil. Now that's interesting because, I mean, that's interesting insofar as it's an interesting thing to say that when we know that the peoples, that neither the Dravidian or the Indo-European speaking peoples, right, form part of the, oh gosh, I don't want to get the term wrong. Is it Adavasi? Meaning like the indigenous peoples that were there before both migrations. But people misunderstand why people make that distinction, right? And because there's a misunderstanding of how in a historical, anthropological, archaeological context people say that, Yes, Adavasi. Okay, good. I'm glad I was able to remember. Right. It's like instead of therefore appreciating the fact that on the subcontinent you have such a grand diversity and all of these wonderful works of art, works of literature, poetry, philosophy, etc. Instead, you have this like, well, what if we did what Europeans did and standardize our languages and create these artificial boundaries where they weren't before? And that's like a huge problem. Yes. No, yeah, I understand that it is a charged term. I totally understand. That's the reason why I'm like I want to. That's why I'm saying like this is typically the way in which the distinction was made, right? By saying, well, there's the Dravidian speakers, and then there are the Indo-European speakers, and then there are the indigenous peoples of the subcontinent, of which they are given that name. But my point rather being that it's weird that both two different nationalisms on the subcontinent use it to stake their claim, right, for whatever it might be, but they typically don't address, right, Adavasi issues, right, like in the indigenous people there.
5. Indo-Aryan languages likely have their origin to the northwest of India, but Sanskrit, the most famous of all Indo-Aryan languages, at least in its classical form, originated within the Indian subcontinent itself. Please note that if someone says that Indo-Aryan languages originated outside the subcontinent, this is not equivalent to saying Sanskrit originated outside the subcontinent.
And that's the thing, is that when people want to look at Sanskrit as the mother language, which is how a lot of 19th century linguists try to think of it, try to conceive of it, it means that you are unnecessarily reifying certain elements of what Sanskrit is and saying that it is the only window, right, by which to look out at this pre prehistorical period, right, of no writing, right. Sanskrit developed exactly where it developed, right. It like languages don't typically just completely move in full to another place, right? And we can see this where it doesn't matter which group of people it is. As soon as they leave the immediate area where that particular language/dialect is spoken, there it begins to change, right? So Sanskrit has its origins there because that's where we have the evidence for it. Indo-Aryan languages, though, if they which they did pre-exist, meant that, again, when we were looking at that earlier map, right, of the Indo-Iranic languages, right, like that's a huge area that doesn't take into account that people moved from different directions, including through Central Asia, that spoke these languages, that eventually gave rise to Sanskrit, right? It's like instead of finding something impressive and just, frankly, in some cases almost seems like miraculous, the way in which languages develop, right? And then you start to get literature in that language, and you begin to see these inflections of different things, right? Because it's through the reading of the Rig Vedas and of other texts that you actually learn of place names that are not Indo-European, right? Like that's how historians find evidence for other people living there at the time, because the names aren't in Indo-European languages, right? They are transliterated, right? Or they are given an Indo-European name, but they still are known by their original name, right? Quote unquote. Let alone them talking about places and things that they had never been introduced to yet, right? Like this was something that was used for forensic linguistics when it came to finding the origin of the Slavic languages. The reason why is because Slavic languages didn't have the Proto-Slavic language did not have any words for trees. The reason why people knew this was because every Slavic language that exists has taken the word for trees, right? An oak tree, an ash tree, a birch tree, and they've adopted it as that term, right? They've like, oh, that's what those trees are. So now they call it by that. So the Poles, right, the Silesians, etc. Like, I mean, even before those identities existed, they they were able to refer to things only because they already had names. So that led linguistic historians and forensic linguistics to then look at, well, therefore, the language must have, right, originated in a place where there is very little tree cover. Where did they find that it's not 100%, but basing it off of this evidence, right, that took looking hundreds of years, thousands of years, right, back at how other people call things, right, how they write about things, how they relate to them as well, led them to look at the Pripyat River Valley, which is it's like northwest of Kiev, right, in the Ukraine. It's in the Ukrainian north, right, and sort of southern Belarus, right. That Pripyat River Valley is essentially a whole bunch of swamps and marshes. So they didn't have any of those trees, and so that's how they were able to pinpoint, triangulate, one might say, right, narrow down where most likely the Proto-Slavic languages, sort of began their then migration into the rest of what is now Europe, right? And they didn't have any words for trees because there weren't any where they lived. And so the Slavs, the Western Slavs, they take words, based in Italian, or based in Southern Slavs, based in Greek or Turkish or whatever, right? And then you have the Eastern Slavs, right? And when they're taking it from either indigenous languages, from Tatar-speaking peoples, etc., 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 right? And it's something like that. Like, it's something so mundane. Oh, a tree. But why do they all have different names for different trees? Right? It's something that seems silly and easy that, even got into Buber's. Oh, me? I have read it before. I read his book on Hasidism, I believe, right? The clue is in the name Sanskrit. Literally means put together, as opposed to Prakrit. Right, exactly. It's kind of like the Koine Greek of Indo-Aryan speaker circa 1000 BC. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why I'm saying, like, it's an interesting historical aspect to look at when you have the fact that that if you were to do something like forensic linguistics and figure out, okay, the Rig Veda talks about these places nearby, but it talks about them and they don't have Sanskrit names, right? That tells us about the people. This is the same thing in a lot of research that I was reading, in particularly when it comes to Iran, right? Because up until, like, when the Abbasid Caliphate was at its height, right, in sort of the 10th, 11th century CE, only 10% of people in Iran, in Persia in general, had converted to Islam. Only 10%. Over time, that changed, obviously, but one of the things that it had to deal with was the fact that there are these place names, there are these people's family names, people's, etc., that do not conform to Arabic, right? Because they're in a different language, right? So then you start to see chroniclers of the time referring to places that are still in the indigenous languages, right? Or people being referring to objects or to rites that, don't really make sense within an Islamic context. But it's because you have governors that are Muslim over large swaths of land where, again, 90% of the population still hasn't converted to Islam. And so that's where you start to get these, like, oh, this term that they use here, right, instead of using either an Arabic term or trying to Arabize it linguistically, right? They just use the word in that region, right? And so it's an interesting thing because that's how you get to know by looking at these things, the things that stick out, the things that don't conform to, right, a particular language, that you begin to get a greater sense of what was there, right? Same thing with northern India. By knowing all of these cities and these towns and these peoples and etc. and these new things that they weren't used to seeing, like certain trees or whatever, you begin to see the gaps in Sanskrit. You begin to see the gaps in Proto-Indo-European, pardon me, in Indo-Iranian, right, in the proto stages, right? Because they have all of these words for, for mountain, but what happens when you're in a plain, right, and the mountains are very far, right? Like, why is it that they start to adopt these terms at the time that they do? Oh, well, that's because that's when they start using metal, right, iron for plowing fields, and so then that act of plowing a field, right, even the concept of a field, are things that very often are assimilated into that new, right, prestige language or prestige dialect. Buber's got massive stacks of writing on Zionism since his early years to his advanced adulthood. They're quite interesting. The kibbutz movement, that is something I have been needing to read more a bit about because it's been a while.
6. I'm well aware that the Aryan invasion theory, which proposes that a race of light-skinned Aryan warriors invaded and conquered the Indian subcontinent en masse and destroyed the Harappan culture, the Indus Valley civilization, still enjoys some popularity in India among Dravidian nationalists, but it is no longer accepted in world scholarship. In the past, it was popular in archaeology to attribute cultural change to invasions and migrations across the board, and archaeologists have been seeking to find a good explanation for the decline of Harappan civilization. Now we recognize that invasions are only one way to explain cultural changes, and there is no evidence of anything Indo-Aryan on the ruins of the Harappan culture. If there was a settlement of these people, it would have occurred apart from the Harappans. The transformative period between 2000 and 1000 BCE was a period of integration and synthesis, not...
And again, integration and synthesis is... Funny how Europeans love to frame everything by their own colonialism. Exactly, right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Right? It's like, if we cannot make it conform to our understanding of how we have done these things, then it couldn't have been done in any other way, right? Because it's the same thing. Nir has 2 volumes on the kibbutz movement, most of it's written in Hebrew. I mean, I think I much, well, not so Oedipus, that that when it comes to reading, I usually am fine. It's just having at length conversations, just because I haven't been around people that speak Hebrew in so long, that I have any real issues. But because I can usually understand, that's never been a problem, and I can read fine. It's just like when you're having a lengthy conversation that I feel the edges of my knowledge, right? But I would still love to read it, even if it is in Hebrew. And if it hasn't been translated, then maybe that could be a project for another time.
A period of imperial domination.
Oh, another thing too is when Professor Miano says world scholarship, note that anybody that acts like this isn't the case, that somehow it was never taken seriously, but it was taken seriously. However, all of the evidence points that this did not happen, and this is by scholars on the subcontinent, in the the United States, in Latin America, in all that this is the area of expertise. Like, there is no one place where the Aryan invasion theory is true, but only in Australia. Right, that's not how that works. That's not how that works.
7. There are people who wish to call the theory of Indo-Aryan migration into India the Aryan invasion theory, as it serves their interests to equate the two. In this way, they can strawman the current theory by associating it with a more extreme and now debunked theory.
See, this is exactly what we watched this before, right? There's a guy that he's like very, very right-wing, neo-pagan, has a lot of sun wheels on his profile, that's all I'll say, right? And he was conflating the two because he was trying to do the opposite, right? Instead of using it to delegitimize, right, the people that are talking about the invasion, pardon me, the migration theory, he was using the conflation of the two in order to say scholars even today have proven that the invasion theory is correct, which is not the case. But he would, and you could even see him linguistically do it in the video, go back and forth from using invasion and migration. But at the end, and this is the reason why, like, people that try to defend it, well, he meant it in good faith or whatever, blah blah blah, whatever that even means. You don't conflate two theories that are diametrically opposed to one. One does not lead into the other. One is not couched within the other. One was a former understanding that has been thoroughly debunked to the point where nobody takes it seriously. It doesn't mean that there was nothing in the works of the people that wrote those things that was unimportant. Obviously not. Because it was their work which allowed for people to realize that when they actually did more archaeological stuff, archaeological digs, etc., that no, it wasn't an invasion. It was a long period of migration. So we have the opposite too, where people will try to use it to discredit those that talk about migration theory, which is the currently accepted consensus, and those who, on the other end, use the conflation between the two in order to push the invasion theory, right? Which is the false one. Sun wheels and bio, yeah. It most likely declined due to the river shifting and drying up of their water sources. The Indus Valley civilization was forced to urbanize because of water sources drying up in the first place. Yeah, no, like, that is pretty much the understanding, that it probably was some kind of climactic event. Again, I'm not saying I know for 100%, but that there was some kind of climactic shift that happened, and we do know that there were climactic shifts at the time, that essentially made it that it became a much drier region, and that eventually caused, right, even though they were very good at water management, right, that there were just technologies and other things that just had not been developed yet that they could have kept going, right? Some wheels and bio though, yikes. Yeah, no, it's the reason why, like, at first he never called himself a historian. Once I tried to get Arun, right, friend of the stream Arun, to watch the video where he tries to say that he has, I kid you not, this, white dude from England, right, whose whole thing is like England, England, England. He tries to talk about his quote unquote Sri Lankan roots. What are those Sri Lankan roots? Oh, his father used to own a plantation on the island of Sri Lanka. That was his heritage. No, well, see, the thing is that it was a little long. I would love for, I don't know if I would ever watched it, but if he would, like, this is where a lot of his activism and even my own, like, coincide, because we see people trying to co-opt things in this way, right, all the time. And it's so strange to hear someone, oh yeah, I have Sri Lankan heritage. And then it's like, yeah, my great-great-grandfather owned a plantation. Like, excuse me, sir. this is a Wendy's. Britain. Oh no, you mean we can't apologize for our atrocity by falsely framing ancient migration as invasion? No, yeah, pretty much. Like, it's the same thing too that Americans try to do, where they were like, yes, we did do all of these horrific things against the indigenous people, but the indigenous people also did it to themselves, like, before we got there. It's just like, what are you talking about? Like the Powhatan Confederation was a whole system that had, advanced ecological practices, permacultural practices, it's horticultural practices, that ran on a tribute system that was very, very, very sophisticated. But unless they have a castle made out of, marble, oh, it's not sophisticated. Oh, it's not that. It's like, come on, like, heritage, not hate, brother. The Aryan invasion was about states' rights, brother. But that is kind of the thing, right, that we have to deal with. Because, like, if you went over it, or if Arun went over it, precisely because, like, it's talking about Tamil stuff, it is a little bit longer, but it's worth it because it's so weird him going to, like, these temples and to these sites, him completely not talking about the genocide, and then him being like, and oh, I finally get to experience my heritage by staying in the plantation house, right? It's still a working plantation for tea, right? But the house you can like rent a room in, and obviously the room is an exorbitant price that no average Sri Lankan person could ever afford. But he's all like, oh, it's my heritage that I get to stay in this house. But it's like you literally are in like you're literally in the plantation house, bro. Like, come on. Like, I don't know.
I will always differentiate between the two. If you find anyone that does not, please beware, as it shows a level of dishonesty.
Exactly.
Or ignorance.
No, in his case, it's dishonesty because recently he started calling himself a historian. Now, you do not have to have a PhD or a master's degree or whatever to be a historian. That's true. You don't need to. However, when you suddenly start calling yourself that and you're spewing stuff that conflates these two things, so then that way you can eventually make the video where he says that people with blue eyes have superpowers.
8. It is a common belief among the uninformed that history is based on what past historians have written or said. This isn't true. History is based on...
See, what he just said literally just blows What If Alt Hist out of the water. Because that is precisely why he says, I never read any books. Rudyard says, I never read any books after 1965. Boom. An ancient historian just finished saying, like, that actually isn't even history in the first place. So when people call him a historian, it's just erroneous. Hello, Gabby. It's good to see you. I agree. History is based. Yes, it is based. Wait, I have superpowers? Look, I would be fine looking at the video again just because it's so ridiculous. So ridiculous. Right? Like, literally saying that people with blue eyes can see in the dark. I wish I were joking.
An evidence. This is why every theory that currently holds a consensus among scholars is periodically questioned and reassessed. So,
like, look, okay. People know, right? Ilan Pape is a friend of mine, right? He also is a historian, and we agree on so much. But when I wrote some of my earlier academic work, I still took an issue with some of the things he said, even in the book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. It wasn't because I'm like, hate the guy. No, quite the opposite. It's because the scholarship had changed, and there were certain parts where I'm like, now we can update this with new information and argue this, right? That's how it actually works. Yeah, Pape. Well, technically speaking, in a sense, no, he's not for it. In a sense, he's like, there's a one-state reality, right? But his whole thing is that Zionism has essentially reached its end, right? That it has reached, anything salvageable about it. Not that there ever was, but you know what I mean. Like the things that it used to justify itself early on, right, are gone now, and they've dried up all of those other ways to do so, right? Israel is becoming is a pariah state, right, etc., etc. But from what I understand from him is that will eventually cause there to be one state. But anything more in depth than that is a bit, different. So, but I just got 4 books by Pape from my public library today, planning to start them tonight. Awesome. Oh, well, if you have The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, I definitely recommend that one. Yeah, he's, again, it can be very dry, but, again, I don't want to, like, I think, to me, like, the 10 myths about Israel, Also, the book "Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic," which was at that time was his newest book, and that's actually the last time I spoke with him about that book when it came out, was the fact that he makes such a good analysis and historiographical, you know, move by actually saying both sides of the Atlantic are responsible for the emergence of Zionism in Palestine, right? Because people know on my Patreon, I have an article series called "The History of Zionist Themes Render." Yes, yeah. Worse than the desert, right? Exactly. No, what I mean to say is that in that book, you become cognizant of several things, right? And it's something that I've wanted to make a syllabus that is a course that actually talks about this stuff in terms of Jewish history, but it's not politically expedient, sadly, right? Like if like critiquing Zionism, especially if I were to try that, say, in an American university, probably won't go down very well. So it's more trying to talk about it in a sort of diffuse way, because unfortunately that's how you have to do it a lot of times, and to more or less use that book as kind of one of the ones that undergirds a lot of the readings and the study that we will be doing, because it was the white paper by the British, right, after the Balfour Declaration, and then in 1920, and then the 1924 Alien and Immigration Act, right, that halted all Jewish immigration from Eastern and Central Europe. And it is true. Like, this is like you know, going from point to point, right? Going from point to point, showcasing that is what made millions of Jewish people, right, who otherwise would have tried to get out and did want to leave, right, particularly to go to England and even more so America, right, that essentially trapped people in the countries that would later become, right, under the control of the Third Reich. So this idea that like border policy is like, you know, immigration policy is like this neutral thing, like, oh, every country's supposed to have it and it's just how it's done. No, it's not. We have an example from like 100 years ago, exactly, right? Because it was in 1924 when you have that by no longer allowing immigrants that were willing to pay, were bringing their whole family, that were doing all of these things to try to escape what was happening in Europe, right, in the lead up to the Third Reich. Because again, 24, right, up until 32, right? I mean, you already have Mussolini, right? And then later on, you get the Spanish Civil War, right? But in 32, right, that's when you get the Nazis in power. Not that they didn't do anything beforehand, right? And so when people were trying to escape, they had nowhere to go. Because the two countries they wanted to go to, because if you couldn't get admitted into England, you also couldn't get admitted into their empire. That is why there were people, I kid you not, Polish and even Jewish refugees, that they walked all the way to Iran, because Iran was neutral, right? They went all the way to Iran to flee for their safety. Like, think about that, right? So it's things like that, and also the fact that, you know, people know about, what's the name of the ship? Was it called the Exodus? The ship that, you know, had all of these people that were supposedly given documentation to go to Cuba, but then they found out it was untrue, and then they sent the ship, tried to send it to the United States. The United States wouldn't take them in at any port. It's like, that should have never happened. Like it's taught as almost this neutral factoid in history, but it's like Ilan Pape's book, among other things, goes into a lot of how those two immigration policies lead to right? Like in the present day, as we can see on the United States Mexico border and beyond, that they are fundamentally violent things that are used to, right, police people, to warehouse people, or to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so it's like, if you don't look at those immigration policy, we can that is where you can actually be, if they would have taken in Jewish refugees when they became stateless or et cetera, so many people could have been saved that otherwise weren't. Most of these people were innocent people, right? The vast majority. But because of immigration policy, they couldn't go to the two countries that Jewish immigration tended to go for. Why? Because they didn't want too many people from that part of the world that they saw as backwards entering their country. And that is what makes the many people's argument that leads to a certain complicity, right? When they knew what was happening in Germany, what they knew had happened in during Kristallnacht, all of that stuff, right? Them knowing that those things are happening to the Jewish people, and them still not opening up their borders. That is something that people have to contend with. That's something I've had to contend with. That's something Ilan talks about, right, in his book, Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic. Because what do you get in its stead? Well, why don't you just send them all to Palestine, right? There's a lot. Yeah. Hello, Galactic Stream Lord. It's so good to see you. Maybe new ideologues will develop well, no, like the status quo will remain. That is not going to go away until it's done, right? Like until the status quo is completely gone. Only then does it change, right? It will always assimilate things. Yes, I have le nettoyage ethnique de la Palestine there in French. Ah, c'est bon. There was no Zionism after Channel 14. Oh my gosh, Channel 14 is such a trip. Because, I don't know. There was a story about it on Channel 12 lately, I see. Here Where We Live Is Our Country by Molly Crabapple. Ah, yes. I'm going to have to put that book on my throne. Okay, see you later. Take care. Yeah, also, if you'd like to help me with my research that involves books as well, you can always go to my throne. Here. I can just put it in the chat. Oops, I put the wrong thing. Never mind. But yeah, you can either go to my Ko-fi or to Throne. Let's see, www.throne. If you would like to go, you can go to Throne, and there, you can, donate to getting some of the books that I need for my research as well. Again, totally up to you. Only please take care of yourselves first. I would never want people to even consider me prior to themselves. So.
While it's true that Indological studies are very much rooted in the colonial past, and theories of older times reflected a bias in favor of the superiority of Western cultures over Asian cultures, this is not sufficient cause to reject current views on the history of South Asia, because current views are based, as I said, on evidence. 9. The theory of Indo-Aryan migration does not assume that Europe is the mother culture of India.
Exactly. This is where the white supremacist diversion happens, right? Why do they want it to be an invasion? Why do they want it to be that the Vedic Sanskrit and the Sanskrit texts were written outside of northern India? Because then they can say it was Europeans that did it. Right? Yes, and please make sure to like the stream and subscribe. So that way, soon enough, I can start getting super chats and such, because that would be cool.
Or that Europeans entered India and gave them their culture or their civilization. or superior customs. It assumes, rather, that the homeland of Indo-Europeans is outside of both Western Europe and India, and that both Western Europe and India have common origins.
Exactly. Like this is the point. It's not that it came from a place, like that it's identifiable as Europe or as India, right? Northern India. Like the whole point is that these spaces already had one way of being understood. And then through these migrations, that's what expanded them. But it was by people that were from outside of both spaces. But when they try to emphasize one to the detriment of another, it's usually because they either want to say Europe gave culture to the subcontinent, right? So it's still very colonialist thinking. Or, on the other hand, with Hindu nationalists, right? You have them saying, no, it was done here, and in fact, all culture started here, and then left from India, right?
They're better described as linguistic siblings. So although there continues to be debate among scholars about exactly where the homeland of Indo-Europeans was, there is general agreement that neither Western Europe nor India was that homeland. So now we get to the out of India theory, OIT, also known as indigenous Aryanism, which posits that India was the homeland of Indo-European languages. Perhaps the first thing you should know about is that it's the creation of amateurs and is not taken seriously by scholars anywhere in the world. You will not find it propounded in the pages of peer-reviewed academic journals. It can be found primarily in the press, on the internet, and in popular books directed towards a general audience. The OIT is most popular in India among Hindu nationalists. Indian academic historians, archaeologists, and linguists do not accept OIT, though there are a few exceptions. OIT ideologues will say that this is because the academics are being controlled or influenced by the West, and because they're all just a bunch of Marxists.
Oh my god.
I've read rather a lot about the archaeology of India in the period in question.
Like the fact that they still try to do the like subversive cultural Marxists, like come on. Just leave it alone.
Question, and what I've gathered from it is that archaeology really doesn't show any clear-cut evidence either for or against the theory of Indo-Aryan migration, or for or against indigenous Aryanism. It could go either way. There is, however, some circumstantial evidence that could be relevant. So, for example, the material evidence seems to suggest that horse breeding didn't begin in the region until after the proposed Indo-Aryan migration into India took.
And again, like this is another thing too, because then people try to use the wheel as like as a tech tree gotcha against other cultures. The usage of the horse wouldn't have made sense into places before the horse that people identified that was domesticated, because it was domesticated in two places, one closer to the Caspian Sea and one closer to sort of almost near Mongolia, right? The Botai culture. Is that the reason why they were very useful where they were domesticated was because it was very flat. On your way into northern India, there's a lot of mountains, right? There's a lot of mountains, right? Not grassland, but mountains, right? Like I know to go from Kabul down to Jalalabad, all the way to then cross the border with Pakistan, even that is filled with tons of mountains, right? Even though that road is mainly in this one valley, which is where most people historically have crossed into the subcontinent or back into Central Asia, is one that's just surrounded by mountains. I mean, it's the only reason why that Jalalabad is there and that is there is precisely because it is the one area where there is a valley low enough that people can walk into what is Afghanistan. Where are the Marxists? Where are they? Are they with us here, right? Are the Marxists in the room with us now?
Place, or that the society reflected in the Rig Veda, the earliest Vedic Indo-Aryan text, does not appear to match the material evidence of a literate urban society we have found in the Harappan civilization. This has not stopped some people from asserting that archaeology not only contradicts the theory of Indo-Aryan migration, but it in fact supports OIT. One proponent of OIT.
Wait,
OIT, a Flemish author by the name of Conrad Elst, said this.
Oh gosh, not Onzrat Elst. I'm not aware of any government interest in correcting distorted history. Come on. What is that wording, bro? What is that wording? What is that wording? Crazy. Crazy. So please make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to tell your friends. Make sure to, put this in self-promo stuff on Twitch. On Discord. So we can get more people.
In a recent interview. Of course, OIT is a fringe theory, at least internationally, where the Aryan invasion theory is still the official paradigm. Notice how he mischaracterizes the theory of Indo-Aryan migration as the...
This is exactly what that dude did. This is exactly what Survive the Jive, or whatever his name is. This is exactly what he did. Like, how can you say, of course, like, here with the out of India theory, that he's saying, however, outside of India, Aryan invasion theory is the effect. No, it is not. It is not. It has not been for well over half a century.
Aryan invasion theory. In India, though, OIT, has the support of most archaeologists who fail to find a...
This is just a lie. Like, look, you could go on Google Scholar and just look up Aryan migration theory, India. Just write that in there. And you'll get a whole bunch of things. Books. Like, I mean, even in the standard archaeology textbook. It talks about things like this, right? Like, oh, how these things were overturned, how these things were blah, 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 through archaeological evidence. So it makes no sense.
Trace of this Aryan influx and instead find cultural continuity. This statement was done in an interview off the cuff, so maybe Elst didn't think it through, but to support a belief in an outward migration from India archaeologically, you would need to see evidence of this in the material record. You wouldn't merely need to find no trace of Aryan influx. In other words, simply showing there is no proof archaeologically of an Indo-Aryan migration into India, OIT is not suddenly shown to be correct.
Exactly. Like, and this is where OIT, out of India theory, is the Hindutva coded, I guess, view, right? That everything came out of India, right? That civilization itself comes out of India. And I am kind of being very general in that, but that's essentially what that's trying to say. That actually, the Indo-Aryans, when they got that, they were already in India, and then from there they created all of these things that they took elsewhere. Right?
And of course there is cultural continuity in the archaeological record, because there always is, unless one culture completely eradicates another. Usually, however, a new group of people would only add to the already existing culture. And then yes, you would see cultural continuity as well as the new elements. He claims there are no new elements, giving no regard for changes in architecture, population shifts toward the east and south, the introduction of the horse, and the subsequent appearance of new gods, inscriptions in the new language, and the like. These things could have happened without a migration, of course, but to say that an influx of new peoples left no trace is simply false. It's just a matter of figuring out what counts as a trace. He says that most archaeologists in India support OIT. I'm not sure how Elst made this calculation. At least as far as the published papers go, I have been hard-pressed to find any that argue for OIT.
Actually, I've tried, because people will bring up OIT and other things like this, or Aryan invasion theory, because then they try to say, and I kid you not, stuff along the, and it's never, like, their stuff is never peer-reviewed, right, of the people that try to push this stuff, ever. Or it's never in an actual scholarly journal, because the thing about scholarly journals is that they want people that have evidence for things which change the paradigm to publish. That's their whole thing, right? But when people use it to justify, like, so many other things that are completely irrelevant, like, even to say that, so people know about, like, the Germanic migrations, right? Some people say invasions, but migrations, right, from Germania Magna, right, in Central Eastern Europe, right, where modern Germany and other countries are today, of the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, etc., right? Well, they talk about how there was an Iranic speaking people, the Alans, right? And so Alan, right? R's and L's get in a lot of Indo-European languages switch, right? And so, because like this happens in Spanish, right, where you have escolta, right, to mean an escort. You know, in English you say ort with an R, but in Spanish you say olta, escolta, right? That's very common, switching around in Indo-European languages. Alan means, like if you were to go back to an earlier phase of its language, they would be the Arans, right? Literally, and the language of the only peoples that are still related to the Alans and the Sarmatians to some extent, from what some people claim, are the people of Ossetia, right? And what do they call their language? Iron. Iron. So they try to argue, well, because these people call them, they are the descendants of the Alans, and the Alans are Aran or Iranian, right? That's how they try to argue this. That therefore, the Spanish conquering the New World, do you see how this goes out of hand very quickly? Like, oh, they did this, so they also did the other. You know, like it just makes no sense.
I could find only one living archaeologist in India who supports it explicitly, Vasant Shinde, and only then really in interviews. Bibi Lal did before he died. I'm sure I've missed a few, but my impression is that most Indian archaeologists...
Also, who is he with? Who is that guy with? Like, who is he getting praise from in this picture? Modi. Like, yes, Modi's strongest soldier, right? Like, oh my goodness, Kay, how do you say? Welcome in. It's so nice to see all of you. Thank you so very much for the raid. Thank you. Welcome, streamer, and welcome, viewers and raiders. I'm Shakespeare. I'm a history channel, usually talking about, many different historical things, talking about cultural stuff too. It's nice to see you as well. Right now we're talking about the sort of some pseudo history. We're talking about some pseudo history to sort of start. But then after this, we are going to be going over the Professor Jiang, Sneako, Alexander Dugin discussion. So that'll be interesting. Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Oh my gosh. Could just be getting an award. True, but I mean, if he's one of the few people, that actually talks about it, right, and he's getting an award, I feel like that says a lot.
Who work on this period do not
Hello,
support the
thank you. Hope you had a good stream too.
I decided to contact an Indian archaeologist, one who works on this period in particular, to see what I can...
Okay. Very, very fascinating. All wonderful. Oh, thank you so much for the follow. I appreciate that. Oh, wait. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Now, I'm going to transition over because I'm going to look for that other video. The Professor Jiang one. Let's see here. Oh my gosh, this is already starting to give me some kind of anxiety. Like, oh no, what do they say? Okay.
How you doing, Alexander?
Oh my gosh, here we go. I think Sunday is also covering the once he hits $100. Ah, well, I was like, once I do have the ability to have super chats and all of that stuff, I will start doing things like that as well. But right now, it's like kind of difficult to really do that very well. Edit. Oh, I'll put it in right now. Oh, so the one we just covered? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll get that for you. Give me one quick second. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. I really appreciate it. Okay, I'll put it in the YouTube chat here. Also, remember, if you'd like to support me in some way, you can always do so by going to my Throne, throne.com/Shakespeare, or also on Ko-fi, right? Ko-fi.com/Shakespeare. If you'd like to help me in some way, feel free, or to go to my Throne if you'd like to help get stuff that I need for my research. Either way, it works. Now we go to this. I don't know how I feel about this. No, just
There.
Hey, hello, hello.
Hi.
Hey, great to hear from
Do
you.
you hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hear you loud and clear.
Yes.
okay. Like, I know that his daughter, unfortunately, was, murked. But it is kind of weird to have her picture just like all of these pictures of her and right there. Because she wrote similar stuff to what he did, right? Like, it's not like, oh, she wasn't part of his whole, thing. Rather, she was, but let me make sure that this is 125.
Can you hear us?
Right. Great. Perfect. Excellent.
All right. Just want to make sure that we have everything set up here. Professor Jiang, should I have the document you sent me earlier?
Yes, that is Professor Dugin's PowerPoint, and I think it'd be a good framework for discussion.
Okay. Do you think that it's worth screen sharing or privately looking at it?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we should do is maybe go point by point, slide by slide, because it's very, it's very broad, and I have some questions for Professor Dugin in his PPT.
Okay.
So it is up to you to decide. I just have sensed that in order to show a kind of context of approach to the end time problem in 4 different traditions.
Wait, this is about the end times? That's what this conversation is about? The end times? I have to wonder though. Okay, Sneako is Muslim. Jiang, I don't know. Maybe he's Christian, maybe, who knows. Dugin is Eastern Orthodox, I guess. Talking about the end times like that seems to me like very evangelical Protestant. Was this before or after? This was 6 days ago, so I think it's technically before.
In dispensationalism, Protestant, American.
Oh, there we go.
In Zionist, in Shia, and Islamic in general, and in Russian, so Orthodox. So it could.
Okay, look, I gotta say something about this. One, Zionism, that is very strange to then talk about Shia Islam and Orthodox Christianity, because Zionism is not a religion. Judaism is one. Zionism is not. Zionism is a ideology. To be just very matter of fact, it is an ideology. It has nothing really to do with the Jewish tradition and the Jewish faith. Right? It's kind of just a complete accident of history that they happen to be Jewish. In an ethnic sense, I guess. But like, it's a weird, like, it's not a religion, so it doesn't really have an eschatology in that sense. Eschatology, thanks to Schofield Worst Bible. Yeah, I mean, like, I get why. See, I was thinking of putting a Schofield Bible on my throne, so that way, because I like, I like when I stream and we're talking about interesting things. Because, like, look, I literally have this, like, I don't even know how to describe this. It's like a giant Rolodex, right? I'll just call it like that. And in it is how I organize alphabetically all of the articles, the academic articles I have to be reading, and different things like that, right? So that way I know where everything is, right? I like to keep things organized. One of the things I've been wanting to also do is to do some streams where it's kind of like a mini lesson, I guess, if I could call it that. I don't know if I quite want to call it that, but that is actually looking at the text that chat crowdfunds, and so that way, and I connect to my research. So then that way, a good portion of it is not just me reacting, but also me going in depth about a particular topic, right? And the Schofield Bible is one of those things that would be interesting.
Could be of use, or maybe not. So it is up to you.
But I would only do it if you, Boy Meets Mini, would join me for it, because otherwise, I mean, there are some things that I just don't know, right? That I just don't know from the Christian perspective.
To decide how use it. We can show that. We can not show that. So it's up to you. If it will be useful, we could make appeal to these slides.
Whoa.
Okay, let me try to bring it onto Zoom. I haven't done this before. Yeah, I got the chance to look through it yesterday. I thought it's a pretty straightforward document, and I think it has a good frame of discussion here. So yeah, absolutely. And once again, I want to thank you both for taking the time to come on here today. I greatly appreciate this. There's been a lot of anticipation for this stream, and I'm sure it's going to be an interesting conversation. Thanks so much for coming on.
Wait, is it me, or is that TV not working behind him? Like, is that part of the effect? Like, is this his house? I mean, I will say one thing. Very clean house. I wish that, but for Sneako. We'll say that.
Well, thanks so much for hosting.
Thank you very much for inviting us and proposing your platform for this discussion. So I'm at your disposal. So I have the pair of hours dedicated totally to that, maybe more if it is possible. So it is unlimited on my side, I would say.
Okay, sounds great. And I'm going to see side by side, I think. I'm trying to share it with so that we can see also the cameras. Can you?
Right.
Are you able to see it, or?
Yes,
I am.
see. And I myself also.
Oh, here we go. I can see it like this. All right. So let's start this discussion with this PowerPoint here. So it seems like it covers a lot of the basic.
Wait, the eschatology of global war. This is not going to end well. I'm sorry. This is already concerning to me. The eschatology of global war. That doesn't. What does this have to do with dispensationalism again? I mean, I can guess, but I really want to make sure that I know how on earth this connects. But
basics of eschatology, and this is something I'm Muslim, so this is pretty standard for us.
The TV could be working, but frame rates, TV and camera are such so just showed slow motion. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that I can see Twitch chat, but it's not. It's acting a little funny.
So well, no, but this is something that Professor Jiang has detailed extensively throughout his lectures, and I think that he shows.
But I think this also was after Professor Jiang said, I never called myself Professor Jiang. I'm not a professor, right? So it's a weird thing that but he's still gonna call him professor. You know what I mean? I don't know, maybe that's just weird to me, but it's like, I thought the whole point was that you're not a professor, right? Or
the similarities and the overlapping themes and different faiths in eschatology, but also the major differences and how you can pinpoint what's happening in the world geopolitically and see that there's an overarching theme and that it all goes back to eschatological beliefs. Correct?
Okay.
Yes.
So what he's saying is that is there a typology, right? That is what this is, right? It's looking at things in the past, right? They do this with Jesus, right? Saying, oh, Elijah was like Jesus because Elijah did this. Joshua was like Jesus because Joshua did this. Moses was like Jesus, right? Like that's where typology comes from, right? It's trying to look in the Jewish Bible and find precursors, prefigurations of Jesus, and then say, oh, see, there's this connection between the two. It's a weird thing to say that you could do that on something that isn't a, I don't want to say a completely closed system, but I think people might understand what I mean by that, right? Like history is a very open system, right? There's so many vectors and so many complicating variables and factors, right? He means to imply that he is not a professor in a transcendental way. Ah, I see. Sneako looks so unsure of himself and out of his depth. I mean, right here he looks scared. Like, I'm sorry, like to me, like this is like a good like pause champ, you know.
I would also make a point that, so I really got into geopolitics and eschatology because I read Professor Dugin's book, The Foundation of Geopolitics, which I highly recommend. I think it.
So this is his origin story. This is how he went from English teacher to whatever the hell he is now. He read Dugin. Ah, wonderful. So, yeah, read Dugin is brain rot. And then just rehashes it over and over again, I guess, is what he does now.
It is the most important geopolitical book in our modern era. And the thing to learn about eschatology
Really?
is that behind eschatology is also national character, the soul of a nation.
What does that mean? The soul of a nation. Okay, bro, if you say so. Okay. The soul of a nation. I don't know if I want to know what he means by that, to be quite honest. That doesn't. How does the end times connect to the soul of a nation? I mean, only if you're gonna make an argument for why people should believe in a national religion or something, right? That therefore holds all the people in that society to one standard or something like that. Soul of a nation, bro, is quoting Biden too. Yeah, corporations are peoples and nations have souls, right? Yeah, exactly. It's like
Why eschatology is so important. Eschatology is this expression of your national soul.
okay, how is eschatology? Look, I'm totally willing. Like, I'm willing to just be neutral and really be like, okay, fine. Like, let me think through this. Eschatology is just the expression of your national soul. I don't really get what he's trying to get at here, other than a nation's character, whatever you want to call it, right, is founded upon its relationship to the sort of telos or eschaton, right, the sort of end of days that determines how the nation proceeds.
Okay. Do you have major disagreements? And well, first off, how well do you know each other?
It's our first time.
Okay. So can I ask you, Alexander Dugin, or if I'll just call you Professor Dugin, what is your analysis of Professor Jiang?
Yeah, I thought that too when I heard Soul of a Nation. I'm kind of like, that makes me think of Birth of a Nation.
These lectures, and what do you think he gets correct and incorrect with eschatology?
So, first of all, I have many Chinese friends in China, a huge amount.
Oh my god. Seriously, oh my gosh. Dugin did the meme, literally. I have lots of Chinese friends. I have lots of this ethnicity, this race friends. What does that have to do with anything? I don't know. It's just one of those weird things, Lamau, of course, right? Of course.
Friends. And when I have spoken, when I was speaking to them, I have remarked that almost nobody knew anything about eschatology. So that Chinese culture is very particular in my opinion. It is very balanced. The Confucianist, the balance.
Oh my gosh, Orientalism. This is just pure Orientalism. It's very balanced with nature. It's completely harmonized to the four seasons. Like, come on. Come on. Dugin is China maxing? Yeah.
Between male and female, between
Oh my gosh. This is so bad already. Like, just let Dugin speak it already. I'm just like... But these fools just want to sound smart. I mean, I guess so, but this is coming off as super Orientalist already. Just this little diatribe right here. You know, the Confucianist. Okay.
and Jiang. So that is the harmony that prevails. So it is not about time, not about history, not about final combat, final battle, but more than that about how we need to make things to be very in peaceful way in the harmony. And my very good friends in China, they always ask me, what is going on in the Middle East? What is about this Zionism? Why there is so important to have greater Israel? Why it's so important?
You know, it's one of those things when you try to ventriloquize, right, other people by saying, my friends say this, my friends blah blah blah. What is the point? Like, you don't require to have Chinese friends to make the point and make it relevant to China. It is weird though that they would ask these questions to him as if China doesn't know about the Middle East. Like, we need this sage to tell us, right? It just makes no sense.
And to be dispensationalist in Protestant circles, in evangelicals, so and as well they didn't understand Russian Capricornic idea of our eschatology. And after that, after having very good and friendful discussions with my Chinese friends, I have it seems that it was on your stream, Sneako. So I have remarked that unique Chinese man who has shown the very deep.
Look at his beard. He is clearly a sage. What is he even talking about? I have no idea. Like, he's literally just giving different Orientalist vignettes, right? Oh, it's a society that's only concerned about harmony. They, everything is balanced, male, female, yin, yang, like. And then this, I don't even know the
understanding of eschatology, of this end time concept in the context of Judaism, of Zionism, in the Shia and the Islamic tradition. And I was very astonished because in my opinion that was the first and maybe unique Chinese scholar of such serious level who easily understands this very special subject of world politics. And I was very...
Okay, I'm trying to break this down. So there's one scholar in China that knows about eschatological things, and because of that, he can understand world politics. Am I getting that correctly? Like, is that what this person? Because that's what he seems to be saying, but he's saying a lot of stuff in between. So I'm like, so there's this one scholar in China that understands politics by way of his understanding of eschatology. Right?
I'm very glad, and now I'm very happy to speak with unique Chinese scholar who has shown such deep engagement in the studies of eschatology. So first of all, for example, nobody or very few people speaks today about Sabbatai Tsevi, Jakob Leber Frank, about.
Okay. This is a weird thing to bring up if they are going to talk about Zionism or they are going to talk about Judaism. Why would they bring up two So let me give you a brief explanation. Shabtai Tzvi was a man in the Ottoman Empire who, at one point, claimed to be a messianic figure, right? And there was a big movement, right, called the Sabbateans. However, because the Ottomans were afraid that he was going to cause civil war, some kind of unrest, right? They essentially forced him to convert to Islam and his followers, right? And so now there's this group of people called the Sabbateans that originate from this guy Shabtai Tzvi, who again was a supposed messianic figure in Jewish history, but then had to convert to Islam or face other repercussions. As for Frank, I know that Jiang has often talked about the people, the societies that rule the world. The Frankists are another messianic movement that started off as that, and I believe it was in Poland. But the main thing we have to keep in mind here is, yes, there were these messianic movements in these two different Jewish communities. However, both of them involved mass conversion to the other religion, right? They had to convert to Catholicism in Poland, and then in the Ottoman Empire they had to convert to Islam, right? Because they essentially didn't want a rebellion to break out, and so they would rather this charismatic figure either go away in many different ways of that phrase, or for them to convert to Islam or to Christianity and to then subsume their religious zealotry in this kind of ordained way, if you can put it like that. It's weird to bring up two of those movements because they're both born out of Jewish community. If we're going to talk about whatever this is. But it's interesting insofar as Jiang brings them up because he talks about how the Jesuits run the world. But now if he's talking about from what I understand, he's also brought up the Frankists. A lot of people don't know who the Frankists were, so they probably doesn't click to them that he's talking about a Jewish movement. But now that he's brought up Shabtai Tzvi and Jacob Frank, it completely, I don't know, it's adding this weird dimension that I just don't understand why.
This kind of eschatological Kabbalah of Natan, of Gaza, and this metaphysical vision of Kabbalistic eschatology and how it resonates, how it is reflected on the modern.
Also, yes, the reason why I have an issue with people using the word Kabal is because it does originate from people talking about the Kabbalah, which in French is Kabbal, right? So there is an anti-Semitic undercurrent to that. Now, I think most people don't see that connection anymore, but I hesitate when people use it like this because of that history. I feel bad for leaving out Ludwig Boltzmann. He was always left out. True.
Days, global politics and geopolitics. So Professor Jiang is unique, it is exception. There are some people in Russia who understand that, not many, but there are. But absolutely nobody in China. So that I was very interested in. I have
Wait,
seen.
so people know about this in Russia, but nobody knows about it in China? What is that even supposed to mean? Yeah, there are people that know about Shabtai Tzvi and they have history departments in China too, right? No, they might not have the same infrastructure in the United States for Jewish studies, but they have this stuff comes up in the history of other places, like the history of Poland, or the history of Eastern Europe, or the history of the Ottoman Empire. So it's weird for him to say blanket statement. No one in China knows about this.
I have watched many other videos about predictions, about game theory, about as well about
Which is not game theory.
Greek antiquity, because I have made also my classes dedicated to the classical tragedy of ancient Greeks. So I was very astonished by the similarity of many points, many approaches, and the depth of the knowledge of Professor Jiang about the things that mostly Chinese scholars ignore or could not grasp. Maybe they lack, the majority lack this radical feeling of the end of something, of some irreversible, something linear, the linear time, irreversible fight between good and
The proportion of scholars relative to the general population who know these figures might be the same in both countries. Right. Like, I know that in my subfields of expert, like the stuff stuff I've written about is not something that I could just walk up to some random person and just go all in depth into. So it's weird for him to say there are people in Russia but not in China. I'm sure there are people that in every country that understand this, right? Because that's what academics do. They're constantly discussing different ideas. That's part of the job. So I don't really know where that comes from. But it's weird for him to assume that, because it seems to me like his Orientalist preamble was a way for him to say, almost, and maybe please do, if you took it a different way, please, I would love to hear. I felt that his Orientalist prelude was a way for him to say oh, well, China's it's a different civilization, right? It's so different, it doesn't even have to think about these things, right? Because they're more concerned with harmony, with the blah 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 blah, right? Whereas in the West or whatever, right, people have to deal with this, especially if he's talking about this irreversible linear fight of good and evil. That just doesn't work, right? Because I can go, what time is and how it is measured and which direction, quote unquote, it's going into is not a set thing. Yes, the world, because of capitalism, now has linear time running everything. However, that's not the only way in which time exists for people, right? So it's weird for him to say it's a linear thing when traditional views of time, whatever that, whatever traditional really means, because some of it's even contemporary, is precisely not that. It's precisely not linear. So.
Well, everything it is not to Chinese. So, but we are living in a world with China, cosmos, China, Chinese universe, and other universe, American universe.
So there are different. Okay, yeah. So then I think this substantiates what I just said. He thinks they literally live on essentially their own planet. He's saying universe, but right? Is that what the understanding is? That, oh, China lives in its own universe that is completely, doesn't require any of the things from the other universes, and so they just don't understand it because it doesn't exist within that set, right? I don't know. And then there's an American universe, but I feel like this is just Samuel Huntington's The Clash of Civilizations being divvied up again, right? I don't know, when people say China has its own, because I know that Dugin has said that there is a Russian truth, right? And a friend of mine has often brought this up, that he will refer to things pertaining to the Ruski Mir, right? Meaning the Russian world or planet, right? But in this case, it's weird because now it's a universe, right? Because then it almost makes it seem like you can't transcend those boundaries. I don't know.
Islamic universe, Russian universe. So in order to understand better each other, we need to get deep in the respective traditions. Maybe these traditions could be close to us or far from us, but we should pay some efforts to understand better each other.
Absolutely. And well, I have a couple questions for you, Alexander. I wanted to figure out more about your belief system because I saw some people are reporting that you have esoteric traditions, or some are saying that you're Orthodox Christian. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is. So in your own words, what would you classify your belief system as? And before you answer, people are asking in the chat what eschatology is. Maybe Professor Jiang could quickly describe it the best way, but I would just say end times philosophy.
Right. So eschatology comes from the Greek word eschaton, which means the end. So the word literally means the study of the end. And what eschatology often refers to is each religious tradition's understanding of the end point of history. Why are we here? Where are we going? Where do we come from? And the idea of eschatology is to figure out the point at which God and man reunifies, which brings about the end of history. So
Wait, that's a very Christian reading, though. Like, apotheosis, where God and man become one. What does that even mean? Like, I don't... Like, the idea of apotheosis in the modern sense comes from a Christian tradition. But that means we have to presuppose Christian understandings of the world. Because the idea of man becoming one with God is not something that, like, I don't even know. Like, this is just very confusing. Those are not mutually incompatible beliefs and practice. Right. It's just still strange to me to be wording it in this way, and maybe I'm misunderstanding your chat, but it's just like, yes, you can have an understanding of apotheosis, but what happens if that isn't important in another tradition, right? Like in Judaism or Buddhism or whatever, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it seems like it's a very discrete unit that believes in this, that then is being used to read everything, right? I don't know.
that's the general idea.
Okay. And obviously, Professor Jiang is, I don't want to misclassify your belief system, but last time we
Professor
spoke
Jiang,
a little bit
yeah.
about Gnosticism. I saw recently on Patrick Bet David show you said at the end that you pray to God. So I would maybe say that it's general Gnosticism, but not specific to one theology. Is that correct?
Yeah, so for most of my life, I'm atheist. In China is an atheist society. I didn't grow up with any atheist tradition. So
That doesn't, no, it's not an atheist society. That's... The other thing when it comes to religion, because religion is something that is, you know, widely, right, participated in, right, is that a state that doesn't have, like, the Western idea of what a religion is permeate throughout it, means that, yeah, from a Western perspective, it's atheist. But no one would call Japan, you know, like medieval Japan or whatever, right? Like, because they also didn't have those. Because they didn't require the same type of religious institutions and articles of faith that Christianity has had to have. I meant what Sneako said about him having esoteric beliefs or orthodox. Ah, I see.
I didn't grow up with any religious tradition, and quite honestly, I've had, I was very skeptical towards religion all my life, especially towards Christianity. But these past 2 years, because I've been deep in the study of eschatology, the Kabbalah, geopolitics, I'm starting to develop a more Gnostic.
Hold up. Eschatology, Kabbalah, and geopolitics equals religion? Question mark? How? Like Kabbalah, I guess. Whatever learning Kabbalah even means, because it's not. The thing is that it's not a singular thing, right? It's like you could read texts that are written by Kabbalistic, you know, mystics, whatever you want to call them, right? Scholars, but they're referencing other stuff. It's not just like them just, I don't know.
Framework, but I would not say that I have one religious royalty.
I can find a similarity. I think learning more about Epstein back in 2019 helped steer me in the direction of trying to find some sense of good, because there's so much evil, and obviously Alexander Dugin just spelled out how you speak about Sabbatai Zevi, which is not often mentioned. This is what pointed me in the direction to look into faith. But can I ask you specifically?
How? I'm sorry, the Sheptite Tzvi stuff, I don't get how that, so, a messianic figure, which is not at all uncommon. I mean, hello. Like, they exist all over the place, all the time, right? Where people have this, like, this type of figure, and the fact that he had a movement, and then it was, brought to an end. How did that lead Sneako to religion? That kind of doesn't make sense to me. Like, maybe if he was interested in the Sabbateans, I guess I could see that. But he's not. I don't know, that's just a very... P-Shex, you don't know grift math? Professor Jiang, being Chinese, was born with calculus.
Professor Dugin, so what would you classify your faith as?
So first of all, I'm Christian Orthodox. So I'm Orthodox Christian, and that defines in what I believe. That is my confession, that is my church, that is my religious doctrine, and everything I could say outside of the context, it is about studies. It is not about recognition of my own faith. My own personal and Russian faith is precisely Christian Orthodox religion. So I believe it is the only truth. So in that sense, I am believer, normal Christian Orthodox believer. But at the same time, I'm very interested by deep...
Yeah, so game theory plus geopolitics equals religion. I guess so.
And other spiritual tradition. And in that sense, philosophically, I'm traditionalist. What means to be traditionalist? So I'm following the spiritual philosophy of René Guénon, who converted in...
Oh my gosh, not René Guénon, mon Dieu, quelle horreur. Okay, René Guénon is like the book that most people, if they have read Guénon, he is he's talking about the traditionalist school of thought, right? Not traditional as such. It's this group of people that essentially were anti-modernity, and so you have figures alongside them like Julius Evola, right, who has a book called like Revolt Against the Modern World, and this sort of obsession with older forms of structuring society and ordering society, in a social sense. René Guénon, the book that most people probably will read, if they ever read anything of his, would probably be The Crisis of the Modern World, I believe is what it's called in English. And it essentially talks about how, like, the West lost this, like, magical aspect to it. However, the East, right, again, this is why I keep saying it's very Orientalist, it's that the East still has this. And so there is a spiritual battle between the modern West that has lost whatever, and the East, which still has it. And he's famous because he converted to Islam towards the end of his life, and to a Sufi order, if I remember correctly. And so he kind of like just went, that direction. The short of it is that religion attracts weirdos who would disseminate your sermons to people who might bring you tons of money. I mean, that's so.
To Islam, that is great French philosopher, and his disciples, for example, Julius Evola and many others, Titus Bartart, Fritjof Schuon, and the others. This philosophical approach considers the modernity to be anti-tradition. So modern world, it is not just development, not just progress, but quite opposite. That is decline. That is a fall. And this traditionalist philosophy could
Like, people that kind of know about these things and sometimes will apply them, in their, however they might, very often do talk about modernity as being a decline, but some of them take it even further, where they try to put it in a different context, right? Where it's like there's a necessary fall before the supposed golden age or whatever, blah blah blah, right? People have heard this. So it's weird to bring in this, like a Christian eschatological framework, I should say, and then bring up traditionalism. I don't know. There's just something there that just kind of seems strange. Like, sure, people that believe in that are traditionalists think that modernity ruined, right, a better ordered society, right? Like, one of the things that Evola talks about, among others, is that, like, there is no longer the aristocrat, right? Like, no longer this person that has this, like, tie to this land and blah blah blah. It's all idealized. But the point being that, like, modernity has made human beings XYZ, right? Like, oh, now they all live in cities, and now they all do this, and they all worry about wages, and blah, blah, blah. No longer about, religious questions or, spiritual questions, blah, 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 right? But the main thing is that it's a desire on some part, I wouldn't say it's wholly this, but this view that people could return to an ordered society. This is why Evola then tries to effectively import the Indian caste system and then say, well, the world actually can break down into these things, which is ridiculous. But that's where you get this, like, strange obsession with the idea of a caste system, because it's a way to justify aristocratic control. So, funnily enough, Gandhi also thought that,
be applied to Islam, as in the case of Guénon himself, to Confucianism, to Taoism, to Christianity, as was the case of many of his disciples, Jean Bies and many other, and myself, in the case of Christian Orthodox Church. But as well, I have met, for example, some people among Jews, Judaic Kabbalists who followed Guénon. So you could be Guénonian in different religions. You could disagree with some political or eschatological, precisely, issues, but the main thing we share.
See, this is the thing. He just said political or eschatological as if they are one and the same, or that they could be used in tandem. I don't think that's the case.
All the traditionalists, we share this refusal of the Western modernity. So we can accept different traditions, but we consider the modernity to be absolutely wrong. Right. Atheism, pluralism, progressivism, enlightenment, all that things are totally evil. So that, but trying to develop my own understanding of what.
Yeah, Judaic Kabbalah. I don't even know what he's trying to get at. Like, okay, yeah, people read books back then, and whatever. I guess, I don't know.
Different traditions, different than mine, than Christian Orthodox. I have studied as well the Kabbalah, the Judaism, Islam, Shia, Ishraq tradition, Christianity, of Catholicism, of Protestantism, and many other, Hinduism, for example, Buddhism, and Confucianism, and Taoism, all that, Gnosticism, including some counter-tradition, counter-spiritual forms of tradition. All that is the path of this study. But my confession, my only position as believer, so I believe in absolute truth of Christian Orthodox doctrine.
Right. I think you gave a good segue for what I can relate
Okay.
to. What's happening?
All of that, so then that way he can say, I believe the dogma of the Eastern Orthodox Church, particularly the Russian Orthodox Church, as being capital T truth. I don't want to go into the whole idea of like regimes of truth and all of that, but it is very strange to say, well, I studied all of these things, and instead of making me question the idea of truth, instead it directed me towards my neighborhood truth givers, I guess, in this case, right? So it's like like, oh, well, I've studied all the different religions that try to tell you the truth, quote unquote, but that's actually why I chose this one. And I think that is the capital T truth. That's very strange.
Happened recently, I'm sure, Professor Jiang, you saw this as well. So yesterday was Orthodox Easter, if I'm not mistaken. I think the week before was Catholic Easter. And Donald Trump recently posted, well, something interesting on both Sundays. On Easter Sunday, he said, "Praise be to Allah, open up the effing straight." This is on Catholic Easter. And then yesterday, first he posts a long paragraph about the Pope, and he says, "The Pope is very weak on crime." This is not a joke. He says the Pope is weak on crime. And then afterwards, he posts an AI image of himself with his face on Jesus, and he's putting his hand on what looks like to me it looked like Jeffrey Epstein. In the back, it looks like a Roman god, Libertas, the Statue of Liberty goddess. Some people are saying that that's Malak flying in the sky, and that was also altered. My point is,
Wait,
when I
sorry. Okay. What? Like, I know there was a controversy because in the picture he looks like he's dressing the robes of Jesus Christ. Jeffrey Epstein? Like, what? Like, can you... Does it look like that? I honestly have no idea.
announced this stream, speaking with Professor Jiang.
Does the Russian Orthodox Church itself believe in that, though? If I remember correctly, they consider Catholics to be lost brethren, not heretics. Well, I mean, again, like, the Eastern churches are different because it's like there is no absolute central one end-all be-all authority, right? So it's weird because it's a church that in that sense would have different truths, right? Like the Moscow Patriarchate has its own truth in Dugin's understanding, but then the Ecumenical Patriarch would have its own truth as well for the people that are under his jurisdiction. Like, I just don't understand how that works.
And Alexander Dugin. To be perfectly honest, it went all over Twitter, and people were saying, Sneako is speaking to a CCP propagandist and a KGB propagandist. He's speaking to China and Russian spies. And they started saying, here they are to talk about how Western values are decaying. And I thought, okay, well, they're going to criticize this. They're going to say that there shouldn't be some sort of foreign influence. Well, our entire political lobby has been infiltrated by Zionists. Very clearly, everybody, it seems like, has dual allegiance to Israel, first off. So there's foreign influence everywhere. Second off...
Okay. Here we have actually an example, in a very strange way, of where someone is very obviously using, at least from just this, it sounds like they're using one term, right, when they really are trying to speak to another term, in this case, Jewish people, and then doing the dual loyalty trope, and saying that that is the case, whatever that would even really mean. But it fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between the United States and Israel. Again, Israel does not lead anything. It's there to do things at the behest of the United States. It is a place that has a testing ground for all of the weapons by the munitions companies in the United States. You could look at the Palestine Laboratory by Anthony Lowenstein, right, that goes into that. You can use the fact that like all of the APAC stuff is part of the money laundering that happens vis-a-vis moving money into the state of Israel, then laundering it, and then it being brought back to the United States, usually many times over the amount that was initially, So, like for example, when they give them money for weapons, but they have to buy it from U.S. manufacturers at a profit to them, right? Things like that. Like, I mean, there's so much more complexity to this. But like to bring up the whole dual loyalty thing, it's like, well, then it's obvious what you actually mean, right? Like, then you know what he's actually trying to get at.
What exactly are Western American values? How could that be described? Alexander Dugin, you I think accurately described it and you spoke to what a lot of people are feeling right now, and that the modern Western values that we see, a lot of people are becoming disillusioned with. A lot of people are not happy with what they see. And if that is described by what we see in Euphoria, the new TV show, Sydney Sweeney dressed up like a baby, doing this weird fetish thing, not to make it too disgusting early, but what we see everywhere that's promoted in the media, and even from our politicians, the leader of the free world, the commander-in-chief of our military, depicting himself as what Christians believe to be God, this is not what so many people want to sign up to follow. What?
Okay, first, I have no idea what he's talking about, the baby thing. I have no idea. I don't think I want to know. But the other thing being, I don't even know, like, just how Christians think God is. Well, do Christians really believe that God I mean, like, I can see why they would say Jesus had a human face. But it's another thing to say that that's how they think God looks like, I guess. But that's if you want to be very nuanced about it. That, well, technically, blah, 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 right? You had a person take on human form, and so that's why they can depict that, etc., etc. I don't know. Very confusing so far.
What do you think are the main causes of the problems we see with American Western values right now? Maybe we could start with Professor Jiang.
Right. So, I think the root of the problem is 1694, because that is when the Bank of England was first chartered. And the Bank of England,
This is so conspiracy brained, as people online say, that I honestly don't even know what to say to it. Like, what? There were banks that preceded it, one, and also banks don't work how people think that they do. Just, oh, we're doing Jiang. Yeah, I'm looking at Jiang because some people recommended it.
The idea was that it would take transnational capital and lend it to the nation state of England, with Parliament as the guarantor. Okay, so previously, if you were a king and you wanted to fight a war, you need to hire mercenaries. So you borrowed money from merchants who lent.
Okay. You did not always know. That's, oh my god. Do I literally have to pull up a book about central banking so we can actually go through this? I think so. I think I actually do, because this is just ridiculous. Let's see here. I want to actually read from one of the books that, again, also if you'd like to help out with my research, you can always do stuff. You can always do so by getting me a book on Throne, helping sponsor those. One right now is, I think, 13% funded, or 21%. I can't remember. If you'd like to do so, but that's a bluff. I'm in boober mode, just boober. I mean, we'll get to that. Trying to see if it's in this book or not. Reduction for this. Oh, here we go. So this is the book. It's open access, so you can go look at it yourselves. It's called Introduction to Central Banking. It has all of these charts here. But I want to read some of these things because whenever people talk about central banks, right, because I've written about the history of finance in its developing stages, right? It is something that you do have to sort of know, but the thing is that focusing on the Bank of England is a very strange thing to do because there already were prior experiments of this, and let's see here. I have all of my notes. So, because debts have to be, and I'm quoting now, because debts have to be settled in other forms of debts, there is a hierarchy of debts, and indeed, of the institutions that issue them. The central bank is the bank which issues the debt in which all other debts are settled. That is the reason why this, like, if you look at modern monetary theory, like, one of the things that they say about the deficit is that their understanding is that that represents all of the money in circulation that hasn't been taxed yet, right? So, just giving you two separate things, but the liquidity, the ultimate liquidity in a payment system, can be a commodity minted by the sovereign or foreign currency, or it can be the liability of a financial institution empowered by society as a whole or by the highest political authority, the sovereign. So, what a bank does, what a central bank does, is that it issues debt, right? Debts that then are used to pay other debts, right? Because money first began with tally sticks, literally by way of debt. It was not it did not start off as a barter. No society has ever functioned on a barter system. And you could look at this in the book by David Graeber, may his memory be a blessing, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And the reason why is because you don't want species payments, right? The reason why this doesn't make any sense is because of this. I just want to make sure I'm only reading the most important part. Netting the novation, moreover, requires that agents are willing to accept changes to the identity of their debtors, which will only be the case if the new debtors are systematically better than the old ones. If there is enough species to settle transactions, then of course such a situation would not arise. But merchants may have insufficient species reserves, or transferring species as a means of way of payment will be very costly. So when he's saying here that, like, oh, merchants lend out money, that only makes sense if they have enough species, that is to say enough whatever they're using for exchange, whatever modicum of exchange that they're using, in order to then issue it and give it out, right? Like, it's not like they have money and the king doesn't. The king is the sovereign is the person that allows it for the printing of currency, the minting of currency, I should say, to be done, right? It's done by state authority. It isn't done by people privately, right? In the way how they're trying to discuss it, right? And this is why, again, this is a bit more modern, but it still connects, right? Oh yeah. Perry, Mary. Oh, okay. A way to avoid both the problems of species payments and of an IOU system is to create financial liquidity through a single high credit quality, multiple unit IOU, which is accepted by all as a means of payment and store of value, and which therefore plays the same role as species in advancing settlement finality on bilateral trades without, however, any of its inconveniences. What does this mean? Right? What does this mean? Okay. If this IOU has the highest possible credit quality, right, like US dollars do, right? Why? Because they are backed by the full faith and, promise of the United States, right? That this money is the value that it's being given out, right? Because the United States is backing that currency, so to speak. It means that when you use that as the means of all payments, right, you no longer have to depend upon, right, people using this type of currency, right, this species, that species, etc. Right? And just to go back onto the barter point, as there is little evidence of societies really being based on barter, or in which money evolved from barter, and this is Graeber is quoting this, but also Humphrey, and like Humphrey already talked about this in his economic history in 1985. Graeber advanced that by focusing on debt. This should not be seen as a historical account, right? So this idea that barter somehow started everything, which is already challenging this, like, why are we paying attention to the Bank of England, right? But rather as a reason why mankind developed other means to make trade possible. It makes no sense to barter outside of very discrete transactions. Because how can you say that this pencil, right, holds in and of itself the value of a cow, right? The whole thing about barter is you have to see an equivalence between two very different things. Money as the unit of exchange, the unit of account, is what allows for payments to be cleared instantly, as you know, or as Trump says, right, immediately if not sooner, right? So this is why it's a bit strange to focus on this and then to talk about how the king borrows money. It's like, who do you think allows for that money to be money in the first place? Like, money just didn't exist a priori, it just appeared ex nihilo. Translation: the merchants have resources backing the money, but not the money itself. Money is the lubricant for the trade, right? And like, yeah, like, I know that they're getting at stuff that's, don't necessarily want to I don't want to get into like all of this, but just one last thing I'll quote and then we can move on. This is also from the book Introduction to Central Banking, which is a very good book, recommend. The principal functions of government are to assume responsibility for the provision of goods and services to the community or to individual households, and to finance their provision out of taxation or other incomes, to redistribute income and wealth by means of transfers, and to engage in non-market production. So the central bank is just there as part of that provisioning part, right? It gives you the medium by which you can do those trades. That's it. That's the reason why the Federal Reserve doesn't print money. Why? Because that is not its federal point. It essentially is a fancy schmancy accounting firm, more or less, right? It's just the portfolio managers of the government. It's the Bureau of Minting and Engraving, which is right down the street from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., because I've been there. I used to work in D.C. That's where you can buy sheets of bills, because that's where they actually print it, not the Federal Reserve. So this is why, like, when they bring up the Bank of England, I'm like, oh no, here we go. Like, it's starting already, right? So
to gold in order to finance the war. The problem with this is that the king may die, you may lose the war, or the king may renege on the contract. So there's high risk for merchants to work with kings. So the Bank of England solved this problem because now Dutch merchants could lend money to England and it'd be guaranteed by Parliament, the nation state. And this was
that doesn't make any sense, because the whole point is that how were they able to use money in the first place? Because, like, that doesn't make sense. Like, they already used money as a form of exchange. Then they developed institutions that facilitate, right, the growing of a particular kind of centralized currency, right, that is supposed to equal the same amount regardless of where you are, right? This is why if you go back several hundred years, you see, because things were like primarily by the weight of gold, right? You had people that they would have florins, right? Or they would have ducats, or they would have, from different countries. But it didn't matter. This is why you find like Islamic coins all over Scandinavia and because there was trade, right? How did those coins get there? They were there before there was a parliament, before there was a nation state. So that just doesn't follow.
Revolution in European affairs, because now England basically had infinite financing. It could fight a war against someone like Napoleon and keep on fighting until Napoleon was finally defeated. So it took seven wars for Napoleon to be defeated by.
Jump. Thank you, Shanice. Oh yeah. See you later. Take care. So I'm going to go over one other quote. This is from chapter 2 of the book. Today, this is talking about central banks, right? They have most of the time the following set of the common characteristics. 1, monopoly over the issue of the legal means of payment. 2, public control, and in most cases, state ownership. 3. A clear public mandate. 4. Possibility to create the legal means of payment without any liquidity risk or risk of default. And 5. Deal only with banks and the governments and not with corporations and households. This is why when people try to take something that is very much at only operating at the highest level of, a society, and then try to universalize it, it falls into the problem that it doesn't actually function that way. Right? Banks are what deal with the Federal Reserve. They're the ones that have the accounts open with the Federal Reserve. But the point being is that the government is the creditor of last resort. Right? That's the reason, that's what gives the money in effect its backing. It's not that, oh, it's all magical and it's made up. No. It's that the United States as a country, right, says this is our modicum of exchange and we guarantee its value.
By the British. And the British lost 6 of these wars. So that's the power of infinite financing created by the Bank of England. It basically created the British Empire. But how do you go about justifying to people? Why are you, a citizen of England, borrowing money from these transnational capitalists, these merchants? And if you can't pay it back, your son, your children, your grandchildren have to pay it back. Basically, your entire society is indebted to these merchants from overseas who you don't know.
Oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. Okay. Did people take out loans from other people? Yes. But why were they able to? Because they used gold. They would pay back things in gold. That's the reason why it actually does not work that way. The whole point is, in a war, you're going to get indemnities, right? Like, the country that loses is going to pay indemnities. That is how they pay back creditors. But there's just so much wrong here. Like, I mean, let alone the whole idea of, like, where the merchants are and such.
And so they needed to create a system, a philosophical system, in order to justify this. And this is when you have the beginning of what we call modern British Enlightenment civilization, okay? Starting with John Locke and the sanctification of private property as the highest good, as something that is gone.
It's weird to talk about liberalism and this stuff and not first bring up, because Hobbes perceived that. I find it strange to not mention Hobbes, but to mention Locke. But, oh well.
Given private property, right? And you have people like David Hume, which questions the very legitimacy of human intuition and the project of philosophy, of the pursuit of truth. And you have people like Jeremy Bentham, which put utilitarianism as the heart and center of society. If something brings people pleasure, it is fundamentally good. If something brings people pain, it is fundamentally evil. And this is the beginning of what we call a consumer society, right? Where each individual is seeking.
That is the most overly simplified thing. Just what is he even saying? Like, oh, because Jeremy Bentham didn't do anything. Like, it's not as though, like, yes, utilitarianism is something which I don't even think of Bentham when I think of I think of John Stuart Mill, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong in that. The idea of like, when it comes to Malthus, is the contention that, the economy grows arithmetically, but the population grows geometrically. I forget exactly how a summation I once heard, but it's essentially like, it's a strange thing to say that therefore everything becomes a question of pain or pleasure, because that's so overly like, what does that even mean? And how does that create a consumer society? Well, the whole thing to have a consumer society is having people to be able to buy consumer-facing products, right? Like, this was not done at the beginning of the Bank of England, right? Like, the commodities that you could buy were still limited. Yes, very few people could actually get right? The vases from China, or the silk from China, or the worked fabrics, right? Textiles from India, wherever, right? In It's like a weird thing to say that that's the beginning of consumer society, because it's like technically before the industrial revolution, like the first industrial revolution. um so, which in a book that I'm reading right now actually talks about how, like, until you really get the growth that happens in the industrial revolution in England, like essentially most of people lived just above subsistence level, so they can't really be a consumer society, like historically speaking, if you look at it from an economic historical perspective.
Seeking his or her own pleasure. And you people like John Stuart Mill, who would take utilitarianism and then create a liberal society based on these principles. Okay, so and then from that you have Charles Darwin, his theory of evolution, and Karl Marx, and so.
How do we get from the Bank of England to Karl Marx? I just don't get that leap. Like, suddenly now we're way over here, well into the 19th century, but this is something in the 17th century that he's talking about. Like, how do we get here? It, I don't know. It seems rather nonsensical, I have to admit.
And so these philosophers together create the framework for Western civilization. And everything that comes afterwards is a byproduct of this philosophy. And Professor Dugin elaborated if he wants.
So I agree with this. We could continue that. Spencer, social Darwinism, continuation of this Anglo-Saxon liberalism.
What? How do we? Okay, I'm sorry. That just. Oh my gosh. From Ayn Rand to Epstein is one step. What does he even mean by that? Like, what is that supposed to mean? Like, I don't even know. That's such a weird thing to, like, fixate on. I don't know. Also, I do hear. Oh no, not the game theory BS. Yeah. Oh no, not the game theory BS. Yeah. Thinking. We should. I think I have to go do something soon. So. Oh, I know. Let's raid. Raid the Ferret King on Twitch anyway. Okay, everyone, if you could please get in the machine and say hello to the Ferret King. Tell him that Shakespeare says hello. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me for today's stream. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. See you soon. And as for YouTube, I think that I'm going to stop the stream here, and we can look to try to finish this up next time. I can't raid yet, don't have enough subscribers, but definitely recommend for y'all to go to the other streams that are going on. They're very interesting. So I will see you all soon. Bye.